Imagine a peaceful rural town, quiet roads, dusty horizons, familiar faces. Then in a flash one afternoon, everything changes forever. A man allegedly opens fire in cold blood, killing 3 people, including a pregnant woman, and seriously injuring another. The suspect vanishes into the vast outback. A massive police operation begins. The search goes on and the whole country watches. This is the triple murder manhunt in Lake Cargelligo, New South Wales, Australia. One of the most shocking and heartbreaking crime stories of early 2026. Today we're breaking down every detail: what happened, who was involved, the victims, how the manhunt unfolded, and the latest developments in the search for 37-year-old fugitive Julian Ingram. A quiet town shaken. Lake Cargelligo is a small rural town in the central west of New South Wales, about 450 km west of Sydney. It's known for its farmland, tight-knit community, and a slower pace of life that's typical of Australia's outback towns. But on the 25th of January 2026, the peaceful community was rocked by violence that would change it forever. On that Thursday afternoon around 4:30 p.m., emergency services received reports of gunshots fired in the town's main street. By the time police arrived, 3 people were already dead and a 4th was critically injured. The suspect fled the scene, sparking a manhunt that continues to this day. What happened on 22nd of January, that afternoon in Lake Cargelligo, started like any other in the sleepy New South Wales town. The sun hanging low in the sky, farmland stretching in every direction, locals going about their mundane routines. But as the clock edged toward 4:30 p.m. on the 20th of January 2026, the ordinary turned into a nightmare that would shatter lives and send shockwaves through the community. In what would become an almost cinematic sequence of violence, events unfolded with shocking brutality and terrifying speed, leaving 3 people dead and a 4th fighting for their life as a killer disappeared into the vast Australian outback. The first grisly discovery was made by police responding to reports of gunfire on Bokhara Street, a quiet stretch of road where, just moments earlier, the routine afternoon had been punctuated by chaos. There, inside a car that had become an unwilling stage for a tragedy, lay 25-year-old Sophie Quinn. She was heavily pregnant, approximately 7 months along, her unborn child lost alongside her. Sophie was not alone in that vehicle. Next to her was 32-year-old John Harris, also shot dead. Both victims had sustained fatal gunshot wounds, and by the time emergency services reached them, they were beyond help. For the residents of Lake Cargelligo, this was already a devastating blow, but the horror was far from over. Minutes after officers secured the first crime scene, emergency calls came in from Walker Street, not far from where the first victims were found. Responding officers raced to a residential driveway, where they encountered yet another scene of violence. 50-year-old Nerida Quinn, Sophie's aunt, had been shot dead in her own neighborhood. The sight of yet another lifeless body, a familiar face to those who knew her, deepened the town's grief and fear. Yet even as grief took hold, the sound of sirens still echoed, because another victim lay wounded but alive amid the carnage. 19-year-old Caleb McQueen had been shot at the same Walker Street address. Struck by gunfire in multiple places, he was rushed to a hospital in serious but stable condition after bystanders and police intervened. Caleb would later survive, but not without grave physical injury and emotional trauma that would mark him forever. Think for a moment about how abruptly this spiral unfolded. One moment the town was calm, the next bullets were flying, lives were being taken, and a horrific chain of violence was already in motion. In less than the time it takes to watch a television show, 3 innocent people were killed, 2 found in the wreckage of their own vehicle, another in her home environment, and a young man was left in critical condition on a stretcher, fighting to live. And all the while, the suspect, later identified as 37-year-old Julian Ingram, slipped away, driving out of Lake Cargelligo in a white utility vehicle. The community that had once felt safe now reeled in shock and fear, its peace irreversibly shattered by a sequence of violence so sudden and brutal that it defied belief. The sheer scale of the tragedy stunned not only the town's residents but law enforcement as well. For a rural community unaccustomed to such brutality, the idea that a heavily pregnant woman could be killed in cold blood was unfathomable. Yet it had happened, and within minutes Sophie, John, and Nerida were gone. A young man's life hung in the balance, and a killer was still out there. In the quiet aftermath, as investigators cordoned off the scenes and laid evidence markers on dusty roads, one fact was chillingly clear: the violence had not just ended lives, it had torn into the very sense of security that had once defined Lake Cargelligo, leaving wounds that would take a long time to heal. Remembering lives lost, before we focus on the manhunt and the frantic search for the suspect, it's crucial to pause and truly recognize the victims, not as statistics in a news article, not as mere names on a police report, but as real people whose lives mattered, whose futures were stolen, and whose absence has left a permanent void in their families and community. Each life taken in Lake Cargelligo that day represents a story cut short, dreams unfulfilled, and loved ones left grappling with heartbreak that can't be measured. Sophie Quinn, 25, was a young woman on the cusp of one of life's most beautiful milestones, motherhood. She was 7 months pregnant at the time of her death, carrying the promise of new life that would never come. According to local reports, Sophie was due to give birth in March, and her passing has cast a long shadow over her family and friends. In a town where everyone knows each other, Sophie's death was felt personally by many. Her life was vibrant and full of plans, a future filled with hopes, holiday celebrations, and the simple joys of everyday life, all abruptly erased in a single, violent afternoon. The tragedy of losing a mother, to be in such circumstances, is particularly harrowing, leaving not just grief, but a profound sense of injustice that resonates throughout the community. Beside her in that same vehicle lay John Harris, 32, a friend who had no part in the violence yet fell victim to its brutality. John's presence in that car was likely ordinary and routine, a moment of trust and companionship that ended in unimaginable horror. His death underscores the randomness and senselessness of the attack, that life, normal life, can be shattered so suddenly. For the community, John's passing was a stark reminder that terror can touch anyone, anywhere, and that ordinary moments can be turned tragic in the blink of an eye. Shortly afterward, the violence spread to a nearby home on Walker Street, where Nerida Quinn, 50, Sophie's aunt, was killed. Nerida was described by neighbors and friends as a beloved figure, someone who had nurtured Sophie, cared for her family, and played an integral role in the lives of those around her. The attack reaching Nerida in her own home, a place that should have represented safety, magnifies the horror of the day. It was not just the taking of a life, it was the violation of sanctuary, the intrusion of violence into the most private, intimate spaces. Her passing left her family mourning a matriarch, a caretaker, and a loved one whose absence will be felt for generations. Amid the deaths, there was a glimmer of survival. Caleb McQueen, 19, was seriously injured during the shooting at Walker Street. Struck by gunfire, Caleb endured nerve injuries and required extensive medical treatment to recover. But survival did not shield him from the trauma. In the weeks following the attack, he has spoken about the day, recounting in harrowing detail the chaos, fear, and sheer terror as the events unfolded. His words give insight into the emotional and psychological impact of the attack, highlighting that surviving such violence leaves scars that are often invisible but no less real. These 4 individuals are far more than names and headlines. They were part of families, communities, and networks of friends who are now left navigating grief, fear, and loss. Their deaths and injuries are a stark reminder that crime does not merely exist in the abstract. It touches lives, fractures relationships, and leaves communities forever altered. In the midst of the ongoing manhunt, it is essential to remember Sophie, John, Nerida, and Caleb not as statistics, but as people whose stories deserve to be told, whose absence reverberates far beyond the confines of Lake Cargelligo. Who is Julian Ingram? Now, let's turn our attention to the man at the heart of this unfolding nightmare, Julian Ingram. At 37 years old, Ingram is not a stranger to the legal system. But what sets this case apart is the chilling trajectory from past allegations to a string of violence that has left 3 dead and 1 fighting for life. Also known as Julian Pierpoint, he worked locally as a council employee, a garden and weed officer, a seemingly ordinary occupation masking a darkness that would erupt in the most horrifying way imaginable. His residence was in the central west region of New South Wales, not far from the scenes of the shootings that have gripped the nation with fear and disbelief. On the day of the murders, Ingram was last seen behind the wheel of a white Ford Ranger utility, registered DM07GZ. But this was not just any vehicle. Reports indicate it may have been marked with high-visibility council signage and a light bar on the roof, a tool that could have aided his escape through rural roads where such vehicles blend into the background. The fact that he could vanish so completely in such a distinctive vehicle highlights both his calculated planning and the challenges faced by law enforcement in this vast, remote region. Authorities have described Ingram as armed and extremely dangerous, cautioning anyone who might encounter him to not approach under any circumstances. Every sighting reported by locals is treated with the utmost seriousness, and police have established checkpoints, patrols, and aerial surveillance in an effort to track him down. The public has been warned that any attempt to confront or engage could have fatal consequences. The history leading up to this moment makes the tragedy even more haunting. Court records reveal that Ingram had previously faced multiple charges related to domestic violence against his ex-partner, Sophie Quinn. These allegations included stalking, intimidation, and assault, a disturbing pattern of control and abuse that authorities had been aware of. Shockingly, he was out on bail at the time of the alleged killings, a decision that has sparked national outrage and intense scrutiny. Court documents show that safety concerns had been explicitly noted when bail was granted. Authorities expressed caution, yet Ingram's past was considered insufficiently severe to warrant custody. The rationale was that he had no serious prior breaches of bail conditions, leading the court to view him as unlikely to pose a danger, a chilling misjudgment in hindsight, given the devastating outcome. Now, these very decisions are under intense public and legal scrutiny, raising uncomfortable questions about the system's ability to protect victims in domestic violence cases and prevent escalation to extreme violence. Ingram's dual identity, the ordinary man working counsel jobs by day and the violent fugitive by night, adds a layer of psychological complexity to the case. He has slipped through the cracks of a system designed to keep people safe, and in doing so, he has plunged an entire town into fear, grief, and uncertainty. Every sighting fuels speculation, every report heightens tension, and the community remains on edge, acutely aware that a man capable of such brutality could be anywhere in the surrounding bushland. As law enforcement races to capture him, Ingram's story serves as a stark reminder of how quickly danger can emerge from familiarity. The same individual who once moved among colleagues, neighbors, and family now haunts the headlines as one of the country's most wanted fugitives, a man whose past behaviors foreshadowed tragedy, but were not enough to prevent it. The hunt continues, and with it, the question hangs heavy in the air. How could this have been allowed to happen? And can justice now be served before more lives are lost? The search for Ingram, from the moment the shootings became public, police launched a huge search operation. Initial search efforts, immediately after the incident, heavily armed specialist police teams, including tactical operations unit members, drone pilots, and pole-air helicopters, were deployed to scour Lake Cargelligo and the surrounding bushland. Because this is remote, rugged terrain with vast farmland and scrubland, the search has been challenging. Officers have had to contend with extreme summer heat, extensive territory, and limited leads. Sightings and leads. The last confirmed possible sighting of Ingram was near Mount Hope, a small community approximately 90 km northwest of Lake Cargelligo. Police believe he may be receiving help from associates or acquaintances in the area to avoid capture. Police have also investigated reports that he may have been seen at a property 43 km south of Mount Hope on the Kidman Way hours after the shootings. Despite these leads, Ingram remains at large and has successfully evaded capture so far. Critical incident investigation. As the search for Julian Ingram drags into its third week, the spotlight has shifted not only to the fugitive himself, but also to the systems that may have failed to stop him before tragedy struck. In the aftermath of the Lake Cargelligo shootings, authorities have launched a critical incident investigation into how law enforcement previously handled the domestic violence allegations against Ingram and the circumstances that allowed him to be released on bail. This is not a routine internal review, it is an intense, high-stakes inquiry into the very processes designed to protect victims from individuals who had already demonstrated dangerous and violent behavior. The investigation, being led by the Law Enforcement Conduct Commission and closely overseen by the Professional Standards Command, seeks to answer urgent questions. Were the risks of releasing Ingram on bail properly assessed? Were there missed warning signs that could have prevented him from carrying out the fatal attacks? And, perhaps most importantly, did systemic weaknesses in handling high-risk domestic violence cases contribute to the deaths of 3 people and the serious injury of a 4th? These are not merely procedural questions, they strike at the heart of public trust in law enforcement and the legal system. Court documents reveal that Ingram had previously been charged with stalking, intimidation, and assault against his ex-partner, Sophie Quinn. Concerns about his potential for violence were raised during bail hearings, yet he was released, considered unlikely to breach conditions or present an immediate threat. That decision, once routine, now looms over investigators like a shadow, demanding scrutiny. How could a man with documented patterns of abuse, who had already terrorized his partner, be allowed back into the community where he could act on his dangerous impulses? It is a question that families, lawyers, and the public are asking with increasing urgency. Officials have been careful to emphasize that this review does not detract from the immediate priority of locating Ingram, who remains armed and extremely dangerous. Every tip, every report, and every lead is still being pursued with the utmost seriousness, and law enforcement has stressed that capturing him is the most critical goal. Yet, the investigation runs in parallel, reflecting the understanding that solving this case is about more than just apprehending one man. It is about understanding how systems designed to protect vulnerable people can fail, and how such failures can be prevented in the future. Community reaction and impact. The aftermath of this violence has deeply affected the local community. Residents were warned to stay inside and exercise caution. Social media and local discussions showed a community in shock, grappling with grief, anger, and fear. Neighbors and friends have shared memories of the victims on memorial pages, and pressure is growing for answers from police and government officials. What are the police doing now? As the dust settled from the shocking killings in Lake Cargelligo, the focus immediately turned to one question that gripped the nation: where is Julian Ingram? From the moment he fled the scene, police have treated him not just as a suspect, but as armed and extremely dangerous, and the hunt to capture him has become one of the most intensive manhunts in recent Australian history. The vastness of rural New South Wales, with its endless stretches of bushland, farmland, and isolated communities, has made the pursuit a daunting challenge, but law enforcement has left no stone unturned in their efforts. On the ground, specialized search teams comb through properties, farm tracts, and dense scrubland, methodically sweeping each sector where Ingram could be hiding. Every abandoned shed, every waterway, every cluster of trees is scrutinized as officers work against time in the sweltering summer heat. These teams are trained for extreme conditions, but the scale of the terrain, combined with the fugitive's knowledge of the local area, makes the task monumental. The manhunt is not just a physical chase, it's a psychological battle between an elusive killer and law enforcement officials determined to bring him to justice. Above the ground, the skies over Lake Cargelligo are alive with the whir of helicopters and drones, scanning from vantage points that officers on foot could never reach. These aerial teams provide live feeds, mapping out potential escape routes and reporting any movement in real time. Every sighting of a white Ford Ranger, Ingram's known vehicle, triggers an immediate response as police race to intercept him before he can slip further into the wilderness. In combination with roadblocks, checkpoints, and highway patrols stretching out toward surrounding towns, authorities are attempting to contain him within a shrinking net, hoping that sooner or later, he will have nowhere left to run. The search has now entered its third week, and while conditions remain grueling, extreme temperatures, remote terrain, and the possibility of Ingram receiving help from acquaintances, police remain cautiously optimistic. Officials have stated publicly that, despite the obstacles, they believe Ingram is still alive and can still be captured, a statement intended to reassure the public that justice is within reach. Meanwhile, public appeals through Crime Stoppers and emergency broadcasts have urged anyone with information to come forward, emphasizing the danger he poses to anyone attempting to confront him. Every tip is investigated meticulously, as authorities understand that a single lead could be the breakthrough that ends the search. Beyond the immediate hunt, the case has ignited a national conversation about systemic issues that allowed such a tragedy to unfold. Questions about domestic violence protections, bail decisions, and access to weapons have dominated headlines and public discourse. How could a man with a documented history of stalking, assault, and intimidation against Sophie Quinn have been released on bail? Were the risk assessments adequate? These are questions that lawmakers, legal experts, and law enforcement agencies are now grappling with as communities demand accountability. At the same time, the case has highlighted the challenges of policing rural and isolated communities. In regions like Lake Cargelligo, officers often face limited resources, long response times, and vast distances, making rapid intervention difficult. The ongoing Critical Incident Review aims to evaluate procedures and identify how police can better manage high-risk domestic violence suspects while protecting the safety of citizens in remote areas. Ultimately, the manhunt for Julian Ingram is more than a search for a fugitive. It is a race against time to restore a sense of security to a shaken town, to answer the pressing questions about justice and prevention, and to prevent a tragedy of this magnitude from ever happening again. For Lake Cargelligo, the eyes of the nation remain fixed on every development, every tip, and every decision that could finally bring the ordeal to an end. What is next? The Lake Cargelligo triple murder and the ongoing search for Julian Ingram remain one of Australia's most high-profile manhunts of 2026. 3 innocent lives were lost, including a pregnant woman, and a young man fights to recover. The suspect remains at large, and police efforts are intensifying. As of February 2026, Ingram is still wanted on outstanding murder warrants and considered armed and dangerous. Police have declared a critical incident investigation into their handling of the case and bail decisions. The search continues with specialist units using every tool available. If you or your viewers are tuned into this case, keep watching. We'll continue to bring updates as the situation develops. Comment below, what do you think should change in domestic violence and bail laws after this case? Subscribe for updates. We'll bring you the latest developments in the Lake Cargelligo manhunt as soon as they break. Like this video if you want more deep dive crime investigations like this.